And today we will be talking to Dr. Missy Stoltz about sustainability, and she's amazing, so get ready.
Very kind. I'm not sure that that's really true, but we're going to go on an adventure together today, everybody. Do you want me to just jump in, Sarah? Let's go. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for your interest in the Residence Academy. It's a super exciting program. We've just seen incredible leaders emerge through that program, of which I'm sure you are all. So thank you for caring about your local government and getting more involved in processes. I want to actually start off with a little interactive question, which is, what do you want to know about sustainability? You bet I have slides. I'm going to walk through them. I'm going to talk about what we do. I'm going to talk about our budget, but I also want to understand what questions you sort of have up front or things that you hope that you know, because I'll integrate them into our discussion today. So feel free to come off mute and just let me know what you're thinking, or if you are a little bit more reserved, perhaps eating your dinner, feel free to type something in the chat and I can take a peek. What do you want to know about sustainability? Any brave souls?
Not brave enough to start video here, but maybe we can get something in here. So I guess I just, from my perspective, sustainability is something that I've seen a lot of city governments talk about. You kind of see a lot of programs sort of public facing. And I just moved to Ann Arbor a few years ago, and a lot of my interactions have been more with the university side of things. So I guess I'm just kind of curious about, in the city's view, what's the scope of its role? How does that interact with the university side? How is that interacting with Washtenaw County and state policy? So I guess, just at the risk of being a little bit glib, like, what is sustainability from the city's perspective?
Beautiful. No, it's a great question. It's good framing. I'm going to find a good card here because I want to make sure I hit one. Other folks? Come on in, don't be shy.
I guess, like, from my perspective, is the city of Ann Arbor on its own or in partnership, especially from a financial standpoint, with state and federal government programs or goals?
Great. So is that more relationship with state and federal governments, alignment of goals and priorities, all of the above?
Yeah, the relationship, but then also, like, from financially, are we doing 90% of the cost or 2% of the cost or something in between?
Good question. I'm going to be a social scientist and say it depends. But yeah, I'll answer that. Other thoughts or questions, folks? Oh, we got one in the chat. Let's check it. Sustainability seems like a constantly moving target. How do you figure out timelines or targets? Great. I can definitely take that. All right. Well, the only deal for our time together is let's just chat, right? Like, I'm going to go through a slide presentation and just kind of give some framing. We'll leave lots of time for Q&A, but if you have questions in the middle, just pop in. Do not be shy. I live in this community. I work in this community. I love this topic. We get to have a really special amount of time together to answer your questions and explore topics of interest to you. So let's make it as useful as we can. And thanks in advance for your patience, because I guarantee I will have an 8-year-old pop in multiple times in our session. So congratulations, you get to meet my family. You ready to go? Game on, let's do it. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Missy Stoltz. You have heard that. I am the Sustainability and Innovations Director for the City of Ann Arbor. And what that means is, as you will see in a second, is my charge to work with a team and all existing city operations to figure out how our community is going to become carbon neutral in a just and equitable way by the year 2030. You'll hear me say that a number of times. And I just want to share my background is working with local and Indigenous tribal populations on their climate and sustainability work. And I've worked in the field for almost 20 years now. And I have largely been at nonprofits and philanthropy, helping make investments in this space. This is, I've been at the city for almost 5 years, and this is my first time in the role. I have played a lot of enabling roles, but actually, like, being in the role, doing the work, and it is fascinating. I have a doctorate in urban resilience. And so I think a lot about the intersection of equity, climate work, both mitigation and climate adaptation, and how we do this work, as I mentioned before, in a just and equitable way. How we fundamentally transform systems especially that are oppressive and extractive, and how do we do this work in a government context, which historically is not nimble, right? Governments don't want to fail. And so that does tend to lend to more conservative practices, and how we sort of change that in the situation of thinking about sustainability and long-term climate resilience, or being innovators and vanguards in climate mitigation. That's tricky. And it's also really fun. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what your local government is doing in that space, and can't wait to hear your ideas, because ultimately the only way we're going to achieve any of the goals that we've established as a community is together. So don't be shy. You all still with me? No one's left yet, I don't think. So I think we're okay. All right, let's go. So let me share this. My Zoom friends that are brave enough to be on camera, can you give me a thumbs up that you're seeing the full screen, or are you seeing the full screen? Down if you're seeing the notes page. Full screen. Down, you're seeing the notes page. Silly notes page. I hate when this happens. Oh, please, the sharing of the screen. Thumbs up, full page, down, notes page. All right, great. All right, so let's go. Just to give you kind of some markers for our time together, I'm going to start with a little bit of history in terms of how Ann Arbor got to the present moment. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's going on today, give you a little sneak peek of what's coming. And then I want to share ways that you could engage, and then just open up for open dialogue. All right. And please eat your dinners and enjoy your family, whatever you need to do, right? We're multidimensional human beings in this work. So let's start with a little history. There is no doubt in my mind that I stand on the shoulders of giants in this work. Ann Arbor's been working on sustainability for a really long time. In fact, in 1981, the city formed its first energy advisory board, which has since morphed into our energy commission, and actually adopted an energy plan that focused on energy efficiency or energy waste reduction. If you think about that, I mean, that's a long time ago, right? It's 40 years ago that the city really started work in this space. And at this time, this was really energy focused, but sustainability was pretty normalized to mean more environmental conservation. So think environmental remediation, making sure we're doing soil and water quality work. And that was sort of the pedigree that a lot of the work in the city came up from and through, and then it grew over time. The city was one of the first founders for a nonprofit that I ended up working at. I was a climate director at ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and I worked with Ann Arbor when I was there. And that's an organization that helps make sure local governments are represented in international climate discussions. So historically, locals have been left out of those discussions, and ICLEI formed to make sure we're represented. I'm delighted to share that today Mayor Taylor is on the governing board of ICLEI, and so he is making sure that Ann Arbor and other local governments are thought about, centered in narratives, and really the leadership of local units of government are respected in those discussions, because candidly, that's where leadership has happened as we look through the climate movement. And then as you round out, just a few things I'll point out. Happy to talk about any of these. In 2012, the city adopted its first climate action plan. And 2012 feels both like a lifetime ago and not very long ago for many of us. But in 2012, if you can kind of get in a time machine and go backwards, at that time, the state of the science said we needed to achieve about an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which are our climate pollutants. We had to achieve an 80% reduction by 2050. We now know today that is not sufficient, but at the time that was state of the art, right? Ann Arbor, in its 2012 climate action plan, said we will do better. So the city actually adopted a 90% reduction target, once again demonstrating kind of its leadership and ability to go further and faster, demonstrate innovation in this field. And then as you kind of round out the corner, what I want to talk about is kind of where we are. This will let or set the stage for where we are today. I started at the city in July of 2018. And at that time, we formed our first official Office of Sustainability and Innovation. So historically, this work had happened kind of in layers in the organization, right? So we have this executive team, you've probably looked at the structure of the organization, and then we have these kind of 4 core units. And so the sustainability work had happened within what was known as systems planning, which does still exist today, but in a different form, effectively was in like the public services, the area where we have public works. It was in that unit, and it was a number of levels kind of down the management structure. But in 2018, a decision was made to formally create an Office of Sustainability and Innovations and to elevate the work. And I'm delighted to share that I'm the first director of that office, and that I get to report directly to the city administrator. So I am an executive of the city. My peers are the police chief, the fire chief, the head of public services, the head of community services. And so I get to be in a lot of decision-making conversations, right, about the direction of the city. And that's really important to me in terms of doing this work and making sure it's institutionalized. So 2018, we formed the office. 2019, in November, City Council passed what's known as a climate emergency declaration. These have moved across the world. These declarations effectively say what you think they'd say. Climate change is an emergency, and therefore we must act like it. In an emergency, you unleash resources necessary to respond to that emergency. Therefore, if climate is an emergency, we need to unleash resources that are commensurate with that emergency to make sure we're responding. So they passed this resolution, and in passing that resolution, they set the goal of community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. And I'm going to fast forward. They also said, staff, you have until Earth Day 2020 to create a plan for how we're going to achieve that goal of community-wide carbon neutrality. So for those of you thinking like, that's interesting, I'll just tell you, that was 82 days. They gave us 82 days to create one of the most aggressive plans in the world for how we were going to achieve community-wide carbon neutrality. And I'm thankful that they did, because the reality is many communities spend a lot of time in planning. And by having a very short timeline, we had to do really robust planning, but we had to understand and be comfortable with the fact that we had a living plan, because things were going to change, right? We couldn't aim for perfection. We really focused heavily on getting a solid bike path or map forward for what we were going to do, and building in systems that allowed us to iterate and evolve and get to work quickly. And this is how we got to our plan. We took multiple different inputs. I describe this as a funnel, which is why I use this image. We took public input. We worked with peer cities. We looked at peer-reviewed literature. We looked at the gray literature, things like Project Drawdown. Of course, we have expert staff. And so we took their expertise and their knowledge and filtered it in. And we formed technical advisory groups. So we brought in technical advisors, certainly from the University of Michigan, but from various industries as well. And we formed 4 TACs. One on energy, one on mobility, one on resilience, and one on the circular economy. And so they also brought their expertise to bear. So all of this was in this phase 1. They went through all of these phases. In the first phase, we did this ideation. We basically said to everyone and anyone who wanted to engage, what do you want to do? What should we do? What excites you? Right? What shouldn't we do? And we got this slew, we got hundreds of ideas, right? So we took them all. Second phase, we then prioritized. And you can see our prioritization framework on our website. I'll show you if anyone wants to see it. But we went through and we evaluated everything based on things like feasibility, technical feasibility, social feasibility, cost for sure, cost upfront to implement, cost to maintain. We looked at equity and justice, who benefits, who's harmed by a given initiative. So we ran through this entire prioritization framework. And what happened, our goal in phase 3 was actually that we would have a list of prioritized actions, and we'd go back to the public and we'd say, vote, right? Here's 40 things, which one should we do, right? But the reality is, when we evaluated the top actions that fell out of the prioritization, the answer was we have to do everything. It was that simple. And so instead of saying, what should we do? We pivoted to say, how should we do this? Right? And so we asked, we went through another round of engagement to say, how do you want to engage with us? What are the right messages and mediums? How should we design programs so that they speak to you and that you want to engage in them? What are you willing to pay to see this work move forward? How do you think about the benefits of this? What matters most to you? Is it public health? Is it climate action? Is it innovation and being a leader in this landscape? Is it lowering your energy burden? Or all of the above, right? And so that helped us actually get to the final plan. So we had 82 days. We ran 3 public surveys. We estimate 1 in every 9 Ann Arborites interacted with our planning process in one way, shape, or form. We also used peer organizations and partner organizations to help us reach demographics. Like it wasn't just about hosting an event at the library. Absolutely, we did that. But we also worked with the Ann Arbor Housing Commission and did events at Housing Commission sites. Or we went to the Hands-On Museum and we spoke to caregivers while youth were interacting with different exhibits. And so we tried to really meet people kind of where they were within the community and make sure we had more diverse voices represented as we created the plan. And here we go. So the plan at the very beginning, before we even got to the actions, we knew we had to identify what the values were, what mattered, right? We had the goal, carbon neutrality by 2030, right? That had been established. But what were the values sort of driving work towards that goal? And the 3 values, excuse me, that we landed on were equity, sustainability, and I don't mean sustainability like environmental sustainability, I mean the sustainability of the work, right? That it could continue past this moment in time, past political changes, past technology evolutions. And the last was transformation. And here it was recognizing that our systems are inherently extractive, that our systems have made it very, very clear where we're headed. Where we're headed is for a future of exacerbating temperatures, of increased precipitation, erratic precipitation patterns, and greater flooding, climate migration into the region, loss of life. That's very clear. That is the path that climate change is putting us on. That is not a path that I accept. It is not a path that I'm going to leave to my daughter. So we must disrupt that path. We must work towards a transformation of the systems that are allowing that path and growing economic inequality, for example, to continue. So transformation became a really core element of the work, and one that often is uncomfortable for many of us. And very candidly, something that local government is not particularly talented at working in. And so that's been an area of incredible excitement for our office, and what I get to work or sort of get inspired the most when I get to work with my colleagues and thinking about how we transform the systems in which we operate. So here's A20. This is what came out of all of that analysis. This is on our website. I'm going to take you through a little bit of what's in here, but really here's the vision I want you to hold. That together, we are creating and implementing a just transition to community-wide carbon neutrality by the year 2030. It's audacious, it's aggressive, and it's scientifically necessary. And I am really proud to live in a community that is working towards this and working pretty tirelessly towards that goal and demonstrating what's possible. I often say we're walking the line of feasibility, right, with this goal and the work that we're doing. And most days we're on the line of doing. We're on that side. Some days there's some tears and it feels like we're in an impossible space, to be very frank and candid, but I would rather be on the right side of history and doing this work. And that's what I feel like we're doing here. So guiding this, if I told you we're going to be carbon neutral, we've got to understand our climate pollution, right? Our greenhouse gas emissions. So every year we do a greenhouse gas emissions inventory that follows standard protocols. So the way Ann Arbor measures its greenhouse gas emissions is the exact way that New York City does, that LA does, that Melbourne does, that Frankfurt does. There's a standard, right? There's an ISO, an international standards organization, actual local government standard for how we do these inventories. And that's what we adhere to. In addition, we actually have staff who are helping develop innovations in emissions inventories. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, or if anyone wants to dive more deeply. It is, for example, in the University of Michigan, it is a lot easier to be able to measure your emissions from the buildings that you own. Or if you're KLA or you're Google, right? You own your buildings. You have direct control over those operations. I have to measure emissions from every household and every business, right? Now, energy use actually is quite simple to get information from. But what about when I'm thinking about life cycle emissions? This candle, right? There are incredible amounts of emissions associated with this candle, but I don't know how many candles were bought in Ann Arbor, nor do I know where they came from, how they were manufactured. So creating methodologies that look at things like scope 3 emissions are complicated, but our team is working with the global experts and other municipalities to create methodologies for how we can standardize accounting for things like that. So just what I want to point out here, every year we do this inventory. If you want to learn more, we put our data online, we do videos, we walk people through how emissions are tracking, so you can dive much more deeply into this information, should that be of interest. The major punchline here in our community, the majority of emissions come from buildings, comes from operating our built environment. We are a little bit different than the national average. Nationally, transportation is growing to be the largest source of emissions. It is not yet for us, and I'm not sure that it actually will be, because we have strong public transit and we've been making a lot of strategic investments in walking and biking. And we do have a high percentage of residents who walk and bike, but we also have a lot of folks who commute in any given day. And so there's a lot of conversations we have about regional transit and other ways to try to get people out of single occupancy vehicles. But today, the majority of our emissions, and probably into the future, the majority of our emissions are coming from the spaces that we're occupying right now, our built environment. So this informs the actions that we undertake. You guys are doing great. Are we bored? No? Okay, we're okay. I talk really fast and I try to slow down, but I just can't. It's like, it's a problem. So just yell at me and just like, Missy, stop. And I will really try, friends, I will really try. All right, so A20 is composed of 7 core strategies, and I'm going to show those strategies to you in a minute and walk through those. These strategies are like the scaffolding upon which everything else is built, or the pillars. They're pretty immovable, right? I told you A20 is a living plan, and that is true. The strategies almost certainly will not change, or if they do, they will change in very minor ways, because you have to do these things to become carbon neutral. And it's sort of irrelevant where you are in the US. These are the kinds of things you have to do. Now, there are 44 actions that are built around the strategies. Those will change, right? Let me explain what I mean here. So these are the strategies. The first, and it's not like this is the first most important, just kind of in how we order them. The first is we have to power our electrical grid with 100% renewable energy, right? We've got to make sure whenever you turn on the lights or you use electricity, that's clean electricity that's coming out of the system. The second is we've got to support beneficial electrification. We've got to help switch appliances and vehicles from gas, diesel, natural gas, propane, coal over to electric, right? And you can obviously see how these things are tied together, right? As we're electrifying, we need to make sure we've got renewables on that grid that are capable of handling the electrification that's coming. The third is we have to do energy efficiency or energy waste reduction, right? The best energy is the energy we don't use. The majority of us live or work in facilities where up to 40% of the energy that we pay for goes straight outdoors, right? Our built environments are leaky. That is money, effectively, that you're just handing, right, to heat and cool the outdoor space, which does not need it. So anything that we can do on efficiency or energy waste reduction has really significant benefits. Here's a little secret. Energy efficiency is like peas and carrots. People do not get excited about it, even though it has a return on investment. Whenever we host an event talking about energy efficiency, I am lucky if 10 people show up. If we host an event talking about solar and even talking about heat pumps, y'all, we get 150, 200 people to come to an event. So we've had to think about how we integrate energy efficiency into these other programs. And the truth is, we actually have to do all 3 of these things together in most cases in order to hit the goals and objectives. So a lot of our programmatic work and our design work is focusing on how we do that, how we stack these various initiatives together. The fourth, oh, did someone want to come in? Okay, onward. The fourth strategy is reducing the miles we travel in vehicles by 50%. So this is primarily a land use strategy. Certainly it's about building more infrastructure so people can walk and bike safely to the places they need to go. But it's also about making sure that you can get to the places you want to go because they're close to you, right? So the example I often give is, it won't matter if you have a bike lane that takes you to the grocery store, but that grocery store is 10 miles away. You're probably not biking, right? You're not biking after work to go get milk for your kids for school. That's not going to happen. So how do you make sure you can walk and bike to places that are close? Yeah, come on in.
Okay. Hey, just had a quick question. This is Andre. How are you?
Hey, Andre, good. How are you?
Doing okay.
All right.
is there a community that would benchmark where we would like to be?
Sort of. Let's say it depends on what we're talking about. So we have a lot of peer cities that we work with and that we kind of look like, or that we turn to for certain things. The city that we're probably the most like is Berkeley. I'm not sorry, not Berkeley. That's a total lie. I made that up. It's Boulder. Boulder has similar land use constraints. We have a green belt. They obviously have mountain rings. They're a college town, similar kind of demographics, similar education levels. So we look a lot like them, and we do borrow profusely from some of the initiatives they run. That said, they also borrow pretty profusely from us. And then I actually turned to Minneapolis, even though they're much bigger, for certain energy initiatives. I'm trying to think of who I even was on the phone with this week. Yeah, I'm talking to Cambridge, Mass about some interesting things that they're doing that we're trying to steal. So it's tricky to say benchmark against, because we look a little different, like benchmark all of the things we do. We tend to be more surgical, and we benchmark because our energy systems are similar, or our state policy on X is similar. Therefore, it's likely we would be doing similar things, or we have similar authority.
And also, is it realistic for us to expect our, I guess, a more elevated property tax experience when attempting to, be aggressive with carbon neutrality?
It's an interesting question. You may know that in November, the public did vote to tax themselves to fund climate work for 20 years. We became the 7th community in America to do that, which is really pretty vanguard. It also is representative of the fact that in Michigan, we don't have very many ways to raise revenue. We're pretty constrained compared to other places. Like in Washington and Oregon, they can tax box stores. We can't, right? And so there's just different authorities that we have to understand that we're operating under to figure out solutions here. But I would say one last thing on that, which is climate change is happening, right? We all know that. I'm just going to say we all know that. If you don't believe it, you're welcome to call me after, and you can tell me what you need to tell me. But onward, the reality is we're all going to pay for climate change. We already are, right? We're already experiencing significant impacts. We've already experienced a 44% increase in Ann Arbor and the Niagara Falls every year from what it did 30 years ago, right? We already know that. We see the roads flood. We see basements flood. We're paying for climate change. The question is, do we choose to proactively invest in the kinds of systems, the kinds of energy, the kinds of resilience and reliability that we want, or do we pay after the fact? So that's the conversation we have.
Okay, and lastly, I guess reframing the concept of value.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay and justifiable if you pay for what you enjoy and or see benefit or value in. And so it could be a priority of the community, as it definitely is here in Ann Arbor. And then just to weigh in on so our goal to achieve carbon neutrality comes at a level of a cost. We understand it, and that could, probably reframe so we could absorb it with a smile, right? Some of the adverse effects, like, some things we may whine about here and there. And then still attempt to, and I think this is an individual or specific to Ann Arbor challenge, but affordable housing.
Yeah.
So if you are not forced, but you're committed with values to do something about, carbon neutrality, then you can expect higher costs. And if you expect higher costs, it also challenges the concept of affordable housing, and in particular squeezes out certain segments of society, which, have made Ann Arbor what it is. It's just an interesting dynamic that I think the narrative, or a more clear narrative, might help explain some of that.
So I appreciate that framing, and let me say I disagree. I disagree that taking action on this is in conflict with affordable housing. And I'll tell you that I'm working very closely with our housing colleagues. And what we're finding out is that when we design all these new affordable housing sites to be carbon neutral, their operating expenses are lower. So there might be slight increase in development costs, but the ROI is quick, right? Because the cost to actually operate those facilities is significantly lower. And that means recurring savings that can be invested in more affordable housing or invested in more services for those in the affordable housing units. And I think that we can do this, and we are actively working to do this in a way that actually avoids or stabilizes gentrification, that helps people preserve their homes, especially our frontline populations that have the highest energy burden and already are being priced out by other market forces that have nothing to do with our carbon neutrality work. So I don't buy the assumption that being aggressive in climate change means that we're pushing people out. I think that that could happen if we're not intentional and purposeful. But that is a conversation we have very openly. That is a topic we work with stakeholders on to name and to try to find solutions to mitigate for.
And just to be very clear, by no means was I suggesting that we can't do them both. But the results of doing one, as long as we're mindful of the indirect consequence. So it's great if we have initiatives where we're able to, I guess you're saying, stabilize housing experiences for minorities in particular through.
Right.
What type of programs did you say?
I'm going to tell you about those types of programs in just a second. Yeah.
Oh, okay. My bad.
Yeah.
All right.
Not at all. No, not at all. Because this is actually a really big conversation that's happening in the field about how no one understands effective solutions to avoid gentrification, right? Period, about anything that we're doing. And then the idea of green gentrification is something that we're talking really actively about. And in fact, we're holding a town hall in one of our neighborhoods, which I'll tell you a little bit more about that project. But next week, and one of the themes is working with the residents in that neighborhood to say, we think this is a threat for the work that we're doing, gentrification. What strategies should we put in play to try to mitigate it, right? Like, we're not pretending we know the answer. We're honest that we're concerned about it. So let's work together to try to generate solutions. Okay,
and just to be clear, I definitely wasn't coming at you.
I don't mind. Come at me. No. I'm just.
No. What I'm saying is, I'm a regular citizen experiencing this in real time.
Yeah.
So not coming at you, but better understanding how both intersect. They're both.
Great.
Yep.
Please keep elucidating that in our conversation too, because there may be nuances that, one, I'm not communicating or that I'm not understanding that might help us make these programs better based on your lived experience, your reality. So thank you for sharing. Like, very sincerely, thank you for sharing that. Onward, team. All right, I'm going to pick it up a little bit for you. Strategy 5 out of the 7, is about a circular economy. It's changing our relationship with stuff, right? You all know this. Things don't really go away when you put them in the trash or when the city comes and picks them up, right? It may be gone from your home, but it's not gone from the planet, and it's having impacts. So what happens when I am done with this pen? For example, this pen is going to go somewhere. And actually, there are parts of this pen that have a lot of use. They're just not maybe as a pen, or maybe it is. Maybe it's repurposed into the next iteration of a pen, or maybe the materials are broken down and repurposed into something I can't even envision. So how do we move away from this idea of a disposable society, including materials being disposable, but candidly also people, which is true in most of our system? How do we move towards a more relational? How do we move towards that sense of circularity where things are never really gone? We keep them in circulation, but they evolve to something else. This is a really exciting area of work that's growing right now as we speak, and I'll tell you about that in a second. Strategy 6 is acknowledging that climate change is already here. And so we have to invest in the resilience of our people and our place, and making sure that we're building social cohesion, that people have the ability, when I talk about resilience, not to bounce back, right? Like, bouncing back assumes that where you're starting from is good enough. So I should have started and said, hi, everyone. For those who might be visually impaired, I am a white woman. I stand at about 6 feet tall. I am cisgendered. I am affluent. I have a very different lived experience than many of you. And I have inherent resilience by default of the incredible things that have been afforded to me that I haven't earned just based on the color of my skin or my family's history, right? That's not true in many places. So how do we build the resilience of our entire system to be able to not just bounce back, right, but bounce forward? And that acknowledges that certainly the climate is changing, but technology is changing, the economy is changing. And so how are we building a much more resilient society kind of more broadly? And I would just end by saying, when I think about resilience and in the studies that I did, if the idea is bouncing back, and often we talk about a rubber band in like theoretical resilience work, right? This idea of like, you can stretch a rubber band pretty far and things will bounce back. If that's the theory, then the most resilient system that I know of is poverty, because it's really hard to break out of poverty. And that's not the kind of resilience that we want to foster. And then lastly, and then I promise we'll pick it up. We have our 7th strategy is other, and that's not sort of a scapegoat. It's acknowledging that there are things that don't belong in any one strategy. They belong in every strategy. So think community engagement, transparency, metrics work. Those things have to permeate everything else. And so we called them out as sort of belonging here as opposed to redundantly placing them in all the other spaces. These are the 7 strategies. Yeah, come on in.
Yep, just another statement here. One reason I asked the question is because I'm an African American here in the community. We commonly within the community, sometimes there is a hesitation at times about, well, how can we have them both? And so what I was after with my question to you was clarity, because commonly that's one of the concerns within one of the specific minority communities here.
So
Like how
clarity about how you have both affordable housing or affordability and kind of
like achieving through the creativity that you're expressing tonight without putting the extra burden on any one financially. Yep.
That's great.
That's
great.
where I'm coming from, is a point of clarity. Yep.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to try to elucidate some of the things that we're thinking about. I also want to be really transparent that I think the systems that we have perpetuated put those things in direct conflict, right? That is in fact the systems that we're trying to disrupt, which is why we don't actually know how to do it, because there isn't sort of this roadmap for how. But I really appreciate it, because a lot of people's lived experiences show that these things are in conflict.
Okay.
Great points. But I will tell you some of the creative things we're trying to do about that. Okay, well, that is overwhelming what I just showed you. Let me just share, right? These are the 7 strategies. These are the pretty immovable parts. Built around them are 44 actions. Here they are. Don't read them. Don't worry about it, right? These will change. These will evolve. The things highlighted in red, I just wanted to show you what we're working on. Those are actively being engaged within our office. We are working on 36 plus of these actions. And the reason I put the plus in there are things we're working on that aren't in A20. We missed them, right? The most obvious one that I can share with you is we evaluated telework when we were writing A20. And our evaluation showed we would not have significant enough adoption to be capable of actually getting meaningful emissions reductions. And then a pandemic happened. And what we saw is that telework can work. It is not equitable, right? And not everyone has access to that strategy, but it is a strategy that we can use in certain markets. So we missed it. And it took a pandemic, sadly, to show us that telework actually can work in some situations. So we're working on telework strategies, right, with certain businesses in the community. So that's just an example of something that was evaluated and was not chosen for A20, but we're working on today. So that's a little bit, I mean, and I sort of told you a little bit about what we're working on. I'm going to take you on a crazy journey now about what we're doing, and I'm going to frame it around those 7 strategies, just to kind of keep intellectually us on the same page. So we're going to start with 100% renewable energy. These are just some of the things that are going on. We have a newsletter if you want to stay up to date. We send announcements out. You can join us at events, but just to kind of start for this session, we are installing 4 megawatts of solar at city facilities. In fact, our first installation in this tranche of installations was finished last week at the Leslie Barn. And there are 19 more installations that are going up. Pretty much every park in the city that's got energy usage is going to have solar. We've already commissioned it, contracts approved, they're breaking ground now. We also run a community solar program, not community solar like official community solar legislation, that's before our legislature in Lansing, but a program that helps individuals, primarily homeowners, purchase solar at a significant discount. And this program is called Solarize. We actually, the slide is out of date. I learned on Friday, we just hit 4 megawatts of residential solar. To give you a sense, we've helped in this program, which I'm happy to talk about if folks want to learn more. We've helped 500 households get solar. And because of the way the program is structured, it passes marketing sales or marketing costs from solar installers on to residents because they don't have to market. That just doesn't happen as part of the program design. So we've been able to help those 500 households save over $1.5 million in upfront costs of solar. And over the life of those assets, we estimate that we've helped those 500 households save over $25 million, right? Those are real numbers. Those are significant numbers. We also are working on the nation's largest landfill solar project. We have a large landfill. It is capped. We are not going to develop it. There's very little you can do. And so we've been working with the state of Michigan to create methodologies and to work through procurement processes to figure out how you take what's known as brownfield land and transition it into what we would call a bright field, right? Generation field. And it has been a labor of love and bonkers challenging to get this project to move forward. We've explored creating a supplemental energy utility. We also have a study right now at looking at a buyout of DT's infrastructure. There's lots of feels about both of these things. Staff have proposed this supplemental utility, which is about helping everyone access renewable energy, because at the end of the day, the goal is 100% renewable energy in our system and making sure that energy is reliable and accessible to all. And so we've created this model and we're studying that model right now. We expect results in late spring for what this could look like and roll out. We intervene in regulatory cases. Right now, I'm actively an intervener in 3 cases that DT has filed, trying to represent the people of Ann Arbor, making sure our rates don't go up, making sure we have greater reliability, making sure we don't have penalization for those who want to embrace renewable energy, making sure you have more opportunities than just rooftop generation, things like community solar. And so we're working the regulatory landscape to also present more options in addition to doing kind of direct installations in the community. I'm going to pause there and just say other things going on. Like I spent a lot of time today in fundraising. I'm writing a lot of proposals to try to lower the cost of renewables for Ann Arbor residents. So this is an opportunity, a space for us to really work with peers around the country and figure out how we have higher adoptions of renewable energy, especially renewable energy paired with storage. That's a resilient power system, right? I happen to sit in a house that has solar. We have battery storage. And when the grid has gone down the last several times, we haven't lost power, right? Because I have solar and storage. How do we make sure that everyone has the opportunity to have those kinds of systems or access to those systems, even if they're not on their home or their business, regardless of their zip code, regardless of income, right? How do we do this work really purposefully? And that's what I'm doing a lot of design work with some of the national labs on and working on proposal writing for. That second strategy was beneficial electrification. Here, we've done things like most of us don't interact with our furnace very often. If you're really, really good, you do a tune-up, great job. Just the reality is we don't. So we've been working on a replacement campaign to help people start planning for transitioning to a more efficient system or even a heat pump in that process. We've worked with IBEW to create, that's our local electrical union, to create the Future is Electric campaign, in which we're highlighting and working with electricians so that when they come into your home, they're knowing to ask you questions about what comes next. So if you're hypothetically upgrading your electrical panel, you're not just upgrading it for today's investment, you're thinking about what's coming over the next 5 to 10 years, and you're sizing the system appropriately once. Right? Because it can get expensive to keep upgrading your panel. So if you're going to do it once, just do it once. Let's be forward thinking in that space. We also have the state's only EV readiness ordinance. Anytime a new development goes into the community or a major renovation takes place, they have to install EV chargers or make sure the electrical is in place, what's known as EV ready, so that an EV charger could be installed on site. And then we're deploying lots of charging infrastructure in the community. We've worked with our affordable housing colleagues and actually won support to do an electric vehicle car share at the Housing Commission. So we'll have 2 vehicles coming in that'll be open for circulation for any tenants of the Housing Commission. And we're certainly transitioning our own vehicles over to electric. We actually hit 25% electric with some recent purchases that council approved, including the state's first 2 electric garbage trucks. They are delayed. We ordered them quite a long time ago. We're almost 2 years in the wait, but supply chain issues have made this really challenging. Latest update is we should have them on the streets in August, but we'll see. Supply chains are pretty wrecked, as I'm sure most of you know. Third, energy waste reduction. Just a few highlights here. We passed an ordinance. What is time? Between 1 and 2 years ago, to be honest, I don't remember. But we passed the state's first energy and water disclosure ordinance, which means anyone, it starts at 100,000 square feet buildings, but then ratchets down to those at 50,000 square feet or over, annually have to report on the water usage and energy usage of their building, so that tenants, whether they be renters from a home perspective, this is multifamily for sure, or whether this be a commercial entity, a small business that's occupying a space, that they can understand what it's going to cost to operate that building, right? To heat or cool their home or their business, what their water bills might look like, and they can factor that into their decision making. We've also worked on a similar initiative around rental efficiencies. 55% of the housing units in Ann Arbor are rentals, right? I was surprised to learn how many units we have. And so we're working to create a standard that basically says you have to have a certain baseline efficiency level in order, from a safety perspective, in order to be able to rent that space out. So we put together a task force of landlords and tenants to help create the standard. We're working on refinement, and it'll go before City Council sometime this year for formal consideration. And we're can't leave out single family homes in this work. So we've also worked on an ordinance called HERD, Home Energy Rating Disclosure or Reporting Disclosure. And that is at time of sale that someone has to disclose the energy performance of the building. Once again, Ann Arbor's a very expensive market to get into. We find a lot of people are purchasing at the top of what they can handle and sometimes over the price. And they're not factoring in because they don't have the information on what it's going to cost to operate. To live in that space, and that can break many households. So we've been working on HERD, and that is up for council consideration probably in the next few months. It's fully drafted and in final review as we speak. Last 2 things I'll point out here. We had a program called Aging in Place Efficiently. We're fundraising for it right now. It has been fully fundraised. That's how we've administered the program in the past, but it focuses on working with low-income older adults to help them age in a place that they're choosing for longer. We know you have better health outcomes when you do that. And what we want to do is help our residents stay where they want to stay and live and contribute to society in the fullest and richest way possible. So this program pairs aging improvements, things like grab bars, sometimes even hydraulics to help certain pieces of equipment come down lower so they can access them, wheelchair ramps, whatever is needed for that person to be able to age in their home safely, with energy efficiency improvements. Because the way we experience comfort changes as we age. I'm sure we've all sort of experienced that in our lives already. And so we want to make sure that our older adults can stay in their place by lowering their energy bills, improving their comfort, and also doing safety improvements. So we worked with 17 households to help them make these improvements. And we're hoping to work with another 20 older adults to make these types of improvements going forward. So keep your fingers crossed we win the grant we just submitted. That fourth strategy is mobility or VMT reduction, 50% VMT reduction. And here we work really closely with the transportation department. We're doing things like expanding bike lanes, sidewalks. We're working on carbon calculators to understand the impact of development in the city versus outside of the city. Also the embedded carbon costs of infrastructure, the life cycle costs of building. Just trying to figure out really holistic ways of understanding the impact of the decisions that we're making and the impact if we make a decision not to have development in the community and it leapfrogs to go somewhere else. What does that look like too? So we just want to be able to have more knowledge, more information to make more knowledgeable decisions. We also run a bike discount program, excuse me, and we work with a number of bike companies. This, with the passage of the millage, is going to be ramped up. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. let's see, this is fifth. Circular economy. We have a returnable container program that we piloted with Singerman's Deli, Ginger Deli, El Harissa, and now Cinnaholic is with us. This is where, like in the pandemic, just everyone, if you were eating out, you had to do takeout, right? And that meant the amount of single-use materials just skyrocketed, and the cost for takeout just was exorbitant for our businesses. So we worked with them to test a returnable container program. And we also submitted a grant to scale this to every business in Ann Arbor, where we would actually buy the infrastructure for them and they would participate in the initiative. We're moving to year-round we did move to year-round composting. And you can see some other things here. We've run some resident Race to Zeros to engage people in zero waste initiatives. We've done a sustainable food week. I'm delighted to announce we just decided to do that again with some collaborators. And then we're looking at launching, which is in the future section, some engagement around what it means to create a circular economy and really center equity in that work. We'll talk more about that momentarily. Resilience. This just makes me chuckle because this was like the vitriol I got from the public this week, which I think is sort of funny, but maybe I'm just jaded. We've already put 3,000 trees in the ground through our free tree giveaway. On Monday, we launched another 3,000 trees for the public to register for, and it sold out in less than 18 hours, 3,000 trees. And we let no one get more than 3 of these trees. People are really mad they didn't get their free trees. So there it is. But we're very excited that people want trees. So it's not just about planting these trees, which we give away for free for planting on private property, but it's also a series of support resources like applications that send push notifications when it's really dry to make sure you're watering your tree, opportunities to send pictures so we can see how the tree's doing, and support resources to make sure we don't just put trees in the ground. Those trees survive, right? That's really the goal and objective. We've installed air quality monitors. We have an A20 ambassadors program, which is kind of similar to what you're doing, but it focuses exclusively on A20. It's a 12-week training program for all things. And then the ambassadors join us in actually implementing solutions. And they go out and present. They present at public schools, they present at neighborhood associations. They're doing projects in the community that make a meaningful difference. And there's a few other things you can see here around resilience work. Cross-cutting stuff, I'll just daylight. We have a grant program because we know that we are not thinking of everything, right? So we have something called the Sustaining Ann Arbor Together grant. It's where individuals that are part of a community project or community organization can get up to $10,000 to do a sustainability project that's public. So I can't help you get solar on your roof, but I can help you do a public art display that maybe reuses materials and demonstrates a vehicle or a mechanism to bring more diverse audiences into this work. Or we've done a food forest in a park, right? So anyone could come and actually get apples or peaches off trees. It's public, right? Anyone can access that. So it's open. It's $100,000 a year that we allocate towards the program, and it is a really low bar to be able to apply. It's not like a traditional philanthropic grant. We want our community to be able to access these resources and move forward projects that are really based on your lived experience and what you know needs to happen in your neighborhood or your area of town. It's a lot. I'm tired. You guys all must be tired. Let's go. Let's just talk about what's coming. Short story. Everything I just said and everything you read on these slides is going to continue. And we are working really hard to support the state in the My Healthy Climate Plan, which is our state's climate plan, and the adoption of more aggressive building codes. You may know, or if not, you will now, that we can't adopt a local building code. So we have to work with the state to get a more aggressive building code, making sure that whatever is adopted is safe, smart, and healthy for our residents. And so we've been working really actively over the last 2 years with the state to get a really smart code in place. And it's up right now in one of its last legislative hearings. So fingers, toes, eyes, ears, legs crossed, but that makes its way through. We're going to do more solar. There's a lot more solar coming up in our community. We have a lot of solar viability, believe it or not. Even in winter, we have incredible solar potential. So we want to help people access, and renewable energy is continuing to drop in price and become way more affordable for more people, but not everyone. So we want to solve for financial challenges, and we want to see lots more renewables deployed in the system to increase the resilience, the energy system resilience for our residents. Let's see, we are moving forward a proposal to launch the sustainable energy utility. It's a large grant that council authorized us pursuing. We have some technical experts, happy to talk about what that is, that are beside us. We're designing the system, and if we win the grant, we'll be deploying it in 3 areas of town. And I'll talk about the three areas in a second. I told you about the ordinances that we're drafting. Those will move forward. We're working on a home assessment that helps every resident identify the opportunities that they have to make improvements and the funding that's available to support them in making those improvements. And it's not just about climate action, and it's about health, right? Like, what's the most important thing to do to address indoor air quality, right? If you have poor indoor air quality, which we know most of us do, what improvements will have the most significant impact and reduce vulnerability for your frontline, whether that be young, older adults, people with respiratory ailments, help reduce their exposure to toxins. And we are working to create the nation's first carbon neutral neighborhood. And I think I have a slide in a second. I do. I'm just going to jump to that. That is Bryant. Bryant is located in southeastern Ann Arbor. It is our largest concentration of low-income households. It's 50% people of color that live in Bryant. It's an incredible neighborhood. It's also an environmental justice neighborhood. It is adjacent to the city's CAF landfill. It is an area that has very low tree canopy coverage. It floods. We know that it floods because we're seeing the impacts of that flooding. It's an area that the city has not invested in for a very long time. And we know that 1/3 of the residents in Bryant's 262 homes have energy, they suffer from energy burden, and 20% suffer from extreme energy burden, meaning they're spending more than 12% of their income on their energy bills. That is a lot of money, y'all. And so when we adopted A20, I told you equity was one of the core values that we had, and we said, we need to live this. So let's go talk to different residents and understand what A20 could mean for them. And so we had a series of listening sessions in Bryant. We started talking to the residents, and it was decided by the residents that we would work to make Bryant the nation's first carbon neutral, most sustainable neighborhood. And what that means is actually defined by the residents. They tell us, right? So they've helped us design a home energy assessment that looks certainly at the things we might think about, like energy efficiency or renewable energy potential or electrification potential, but also radon and flooding and what opportunities there are for tree plantings. And so we've designed this entirely new assessment process that's based on what the residents in Bryant have told us. And we've been fundraising to help implement that. We won a grant to hire someone in the neighborhood who now leads all community engagement. All the money we raise stays in the neighborhood. We won a small grant to install solar on 2 houses and replace the roof on one of those houses. In particular, the person who needed a roof replacement was in serious risk of losing her home because of her energy burden and late bills. And by being able to work with her to replace that roof through full grant funding and get her renewable energy on the system, her energy bills dropped by 80%. And she's now able, she has a lot more breathing room, right, in her monthly bills to be able to catch up and pay what needs to be paid. But all of this is driven by the residents, right? They wanted a food forest. We planted a food forest. They have flooding. We took a rain garden class and have helped figure out how to install rain gardens. So this is a constant process that I can't tell you what it's going to look like in a year, because it's going to be whatever the residents tell us they need it to look like in a year. I spent a lot of time fundraising for this work. This is a neighborhood that we are really concerned about gentrification. And this is the town hall that we're hosting in Bryant, just for Bryant residents. It is not for anyone outside the city. You're welcome to come and watch if you want. But for the Bryant residents, we're hosting a town hall on Wednesday night, a week from tonight, in which we're talking about the project. We're signing them up. We want $500,000 to take 19 homes and make $25,000 worth of improvements in those homes based on the assessment they designed. Right. And so we're signing people up for the assessments so they can be in the queue for those improvements. We're talking about gentrification with them. How are we going to do this? We're talking about intergenerational wealth accumulation and how we help. We learned in this process, for example, that most people didn't have wills because wills are expensive, right, to have. So we got a small grant to help bring in legal services to help people write wills. And so it's just a multi-dimensional project. That's one of my absolute favorites. Just to kind of close out, I said this about the work. We work with our CBO, which is Community Action Network in the neighborhood, and a number of other partners. These are some of the things I talked about that we have done so far in the neighborhood. And I have worked on and waiting to hear back on some other grants to help deploy, study first and potentially deploy a geothermal district. So all 262 homes, the community center, the Bryant Elementary School, and our public works facility potentially could be on a geothermal system, meaning that they would have a thermal utility handling heating and cooling, which is pretty significant. We've done a solar potential of every single house in the neighborhood. We're fundraising to install solar and storage. We're trying to find ways to correct market failures, because the reality is the market is not working in Bryant. So if we can find solutions that do work in Bryant, they're going to work everywhere in the city of Ann Arbor. I'm almost done. I wanted to end with this kind of broadly. You all know at this point that in November, the Ann Arbor voters overwhelmingly voted to tax themselves to fund climate for 20 years. The way that this is only proposed, I'm sure you've talked about how the city budget works, but the city administrator, I worked on my budget for this particular millage. We went to the voters and told them what we would be investing in. The budget that I presented to the administrator mirrors this and what we told the voters. But basically of that millage funding, the largest portion we are proposing giving back in direct incentives and rebates to residents and businesses to make the improvements I just talked about before in their homes or their businesses, right? We anticipate about $2 million going right back out the door in these types of programs. That includes an e-bike program, that includes renewable energy on site, electrification, weatherization support, you name it. We also are launching an energy concierge. We're about to pilot. We've been designing it for a while. This is like a bat phone, like a one-stop shop on energy issues, because this stuff is confusing, y'all, and we know it. So this is an opportunity for people to talk to someone and figure out what the right steps are for them and to be connected to the resources to actually make those improvements, whether that's a contractor or funding. And then we're moving towards year-round composting and year-round recycling for everybody. And I mean, multifamily, commercial sites, expanding the amount of recycling that we collect, expanding bike lanes, basically everything in A20 is what we're going to be funding, but it's staggered because we don't have enough money up front to do it all. So we're focusing on infrastructure at the beginning to set the systems in play. That was a lot. Just want to end by saying you can stay up to date on our website. We're a local government. Our website is terrible. Let's name that. We're reworking on a revision, but we do have a newsletter that goes out. We try to keep updates here. You can see the metrics in terms of how we're performing, where we're not on track, where we are on track, and lots of other things, more than you probably ever want to know. So I'm going to end just by saying thank you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for participating in this particular cohort. And thank you for engaging, whether you have historically or you will in the future, in our work to become a more sustainable community, because we're not going to do it if we don't do it together. But I think we're going to do it together. And we're going to demonstrate what true leadership and innovation and sustainability looks like. That was a lot. Let's stop talking. Y'all okay?
Hey, Missy, thank you so much for that. I had a quick question. You were going so quickly. I had a question, then I just got swept away. So I noticed in your list of 46 strategies with 38 plus that look like they need adopting here. One of the ones that it looked like you decided not to adopt was an internal carbon price.
Yes.
And I just am first of all curious about what that is. I think I have an idea, but I'm not 100% sure here. And then second of all, what the difficulties were in potentially getting that implemented, or why did you choose? Did that not look effective? Like, what was the logic there?
Yeah, great question. So the idea of an internal carbon price is to take the externalities of climate and actually build them in to our decision making, right? So we know that you might have heard of a social cost of carbon, that emitting pollutants into the atmosphere has a cost. We just don't value it, right? But local governments and others have to pay that price, right? We pay that price. All of us pay that price in health impacts. We pay it in deteriorated environmental systems, our ecosystems. We certainly pay it in disasters. And so instead of saying we're going to pay it on the back end, we're going to say we're going to factor it into decision making so that we can make a decision that really holistically looks at the cost of options. So we, in fact, worked with a bunch of students, 2019, I think. And we went through an analysis of what it would look like if we actually adopted an internal carbon tax. We created a methodology. And then we had some administrator turnover in the city and we lost momentum, to be very candid. So we haven't brought it back up yet. I think it will come at some point as an important conversation because obviously it's an A20, but this really is more a reality of leadership transitions? Great question. Any
Great,
follow-up?
thank you.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, I assumed it kind of had some relationship to a carbon tax. It sounds like more
Mhm.
conceptual and just pricing it from an actual monetary mechanism there, but that's interesting to hear. And I mean, I understand, I know some other folks have questions, so maybe I'll let up with a follow-up real quick, but I'm just curious. It seems like there's kind of a common theme here around high administrator turnover within other city departments too, you know, so I should let other people ask their questions, but I mean, I'm just curious as a follow-up, you know, has that been a significant difficulty in terms of getting things accomplished here, or is it kind of something you just ride the wave on?
It's an interesting and delicate question, and I really appreciate you asking it. I'm gonna answer this from an alternative lens, and then if you want, I can go into more of like a personal experience. I view my job as institutionalizing this work, right? So I view my job as getting to a point where I don't have to call the fire chief and say, we should build a net zero energy fire station because I know we're replacing a fire station, and getting all the community interest in this topic to just always be present, right? Always pushing our elected leaders and our public to move towards the values that we espouse and that we want to live. And so if I can be successful in institutionalizing it, it won't matter who's top of the ticket, right? It'll just be what we do in this community and the values that we hold. So that's the way I think about my job and this work more broadly. The administrator turnover has been hard. Howard Lazarus hired me. I mean, at some other point, I will gladly grab wine with anyone on this line and we can talk about this. But I was not excited about this job. And Howard convinced me that Ann Arbor could be what it aspires to be. And he gave me a lot of runway to try to create the systems that would allow Ann Arbor to be what we talk about externally being. You know, the recognition that we got. Yesterday we won another award for being the second best place to live in the Midwest. You know, and I read those things and I want us to be that community. I don't always know that we are. And Howard hired me and said, challenge us every day to be that. So it's been hard. I love Milton though, he's great.
So it does sound hard, and thank you so much for the candid answer.
Yeah, pleasure. Liliana.
Hello, I know there's a couple folks also with questions in the chat. I don't know if I'll answer your original question from the beginning and then ask my follow-up question. I am here because I generally just don't know what I don't know. And so as much as I am on the sustainability newsletter and enjoy getting your information, it's nice to hear kind of just generally other things that are happening that I may not have known about since I moved here last year. My question was, you on the electrification slide, I think you mentioned fleet vehicles. Is there any work being done about like cargo vehicles or like getting city folks using bicycles or, you know, other than just having electric vehicles, having some other sort of non-emissions vehicle or those types of trips?
Really good question. So two responses. One is our work towards electrification actually started with a green fleets policy that we implement, which first starts with right sizing. So it's not just electrify, it's make sure that you don't have extra vehicles that you don't need in the system. And so everyone has to prove that we actually need what we have. For example, we have 2 vehicles in a carpool that everyone can access. Like that's the only vehicle I ever use when I go to Lansing. So I have to check one of them out. And so we've got to look at usage to say, do we need 2? Do we need 1? Do we need 3? And so first right size, then right size absolute number, then right size vehicle type, right? Not everyone needs an SUV. Does anyone need an SUV? You know, like we need to talk about the right sized vehicle and then you electrify what's left. Though, just saying, I am working on cargo bikes to bring into the city fleet. So for example, we can use them and not even just cargo bikes, right? I go to the University of Michigan pretty frequently. I'm scheduled back to back. So I often have like 5 minutes to get there. Getting on a bike, easy peasy, right? So creating more transportation options is one of the things we're working on. And on Monday last week, council approved an electric bike share program. So it's going to be coming for the public and for city staff as well. We were going to do a unveiling on Friday. The weather's pretty crappy. So it looks like we're going to stay tuned for when we're actually going to bring the system in for folks to test. But yes, we are working on making sure there are more options for folk. We also all get bike, we have the option of getting bus passes, right? So that's like I bike into work, but then in bad days, I'll take the bus pass. Which is discounted for all city employees. Actually, it's free for all city employees. Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah. I'll take one from the chat and then we'll come to you, Jocelyn. How much of Ann Arbor's recycling actually gets recycled? Yeah, I can't answer that, not off the top of my head. Recycling doesn't live in sustainability, which is totally counterintuitive, right? Because I think most people associate materials management with sustainability, but I can get back to you all. Molly will know the answer. If not, I'll multitask and see if I can find it for you in the background. Jocelyn, come on in.
Okay, thanks. You talked a bit about building codes and housing, but I'm curious how involved you are in zoning ordinances. Specifically, I live right on the edge of the new TC1 area, and I was kind of flabbergasted that it didn't have any sort of sustainability requirement for buildings within it.
So to your first question, there's a team member in OSI, in the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, that sits and works with the building department, which is the planners, right, our building inspectors. He reviews all site plans and all developments that come in. That also means like we do often get involved in zoning conversations, but pretty selectively when we're invited into those conversations. A lot of that happens, as you know, at the Planning Commission and with planning staff. So the TC1 zoning, I couldn't honestly reconstruct the history of that just on the spot. I could go back and reconstruct kind of where we were brought in, if we were brought in, and how we were brought in. But unfortunately, off the cuff, I can't answer it. I can tell you going forward, though, we have a seat at the table in these discussions, and that officially started regularly and formally this year. So all site plans, all developments, like OSI is at those tables, and we are asking for sustainability initiatives. And you've probably heard about it either on MLive or at Planning Commission.
Yeah, well, I went to all of the, town meetings about it and stuff. It's a giant area to not, to just trust that anyone who wants to develop something is going to make it sustainable.
Yes, it is. And you didn't ask this, but I'm going to take this as an opportunity to say it's the importance of building an entire system, right? So yes, having transit and putting people on transit corridors makes a lot of sense, right? And making sure that the buildings that we build are smart, efficient, safe, healthy buildings. That's a building code, right? So we got to get a more aggressive building code. So everything that's developed in those corridors, or redeveloped in those corridors is smart, right? It's like a flood. The first thing you do if something is flooding is you turn off the faucet, right? We've got to stop building things that don't make sense. So how do we do that, right? And that's in Michigan, that's through the building code. And then we are using incentives through the millage and through the Inflation Reduction Act to help people retrofit or go further in the work that might traditionally pencil by saying we're going to offer incentives to help you put in a geothermal system, to help you do all electric with on-site renewable energies and very efficient envelopes so that you don't have an increased energy burden, right? So those are the kinds of things that we have to stack. In some ways, it's like a wicked problem, right? In the true definition of a wicked problem that you can't just pull on one lever and solve. You've got to pull all of these things simultaneously. And sometimes you have unintended consequences. What a treat. It's a joy every day. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I just want to go back to affordable housing really quick. And I acknowledge I didn't highlight anything there. So from the very first budget that we've had in that Office of Sustainability and Innovation, we've dedicated a portion of that budget to our affordable housing colleagues to work on making our housing commission sites sustainable. And that aligns with lots of our values, and recognizing that we have to make that kind of investment to ensure that those living in the commission, we're not asking them to breathe unhealthy, safe air, that we're making sure that our housing commission colleagues can operate really efficient facilities that aren't draining their budgets, right? And so we have been working on, and we actually worked with the Housing Commission to secure $2.5 million in a community impact project to help do solar at multiple housing commission sites. The RFP is on the streets, so we're getting bids on that right now. And then we continue to dedicate budget to helping them make the transition to carbon neutral facilities. So I work really closely with Jen Hall, if you guys have talked to Jen yet. And then the last piece that's kind of emerged more recently is transitioning or making sure all of our housing commission sites are truly resilient to climate impacts. The recent power outages have demonstrated the vulnerability that we have in those areas. So making sure we're designing systems where the residents of those sites are capable of thriving, not just surviving when there's disruptions for our larger systems. Whew. All right, I'm going to test my reading skills. Another question. I am an A2 homeowner with partial solar through the Solarize program. Aw, yay. It was too expensive for us to do the full system with battery. Fair. Even with the solar we have, we feel frustratingly tethered to DTE and their way DTE decides on our credits for the solar energy going into the grid. Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about inflow, outflow, and net metering in a second. Can you tell us a little more about the relationship between solar programs and the DTE we are stuck with until we can get free of them? Good question, Emily. All right. So let me start by saying our relationship with DTE is like a relationship that you have in your life with perhaps a partner. You have good days and you have things that you agree with, and you have real bad days and things that you fundamentally do not see eye to eye on. And that's how it goes in our relationship. So there were things like the landfill solar project that we actually had to sue to get permission to do as a community solar project. And we did. The judge ruled that was possible, and we created an entire structure for how this could work. And now we're working collaboratively with DTE to fundraise for that and make it happen. So even that is an example of like all the ways we work. From a homeowner perspective, thinking about the solar system that you have, we fundamentally disagree with the utility and how they value that asset. We fundamentally believe, and we have lots of research to back this up, that distributed energy resources, aka solar, wind, geothermal, are important grid assets, that they provide grid function, and that when you tie them with storage, they actually increase the resilience and the reliability of our grid. And in Ann Arbor, our grid is really old. We have, this is not a perfect analogy, but I'm going to use this. We have most of our system is on what's known as a 4.8 kV line. Think of the kV as size. So let's just pretend that's this. New builds are on a 12.2, like this, right? So they can get a lot more electricity through their lines, but ours is old, right? And it's not working particularly well. And so we either have to have very expensive upgrades to transition to that 12.2 system, or we use distributed resources so that each of us has less demand on the centralized grid, and we don't have to make as expensive of upgrades in that system. We think that's the right solution. We also recognize that that is a more resilient solution. It means when the grid goes down, and it's going to go down because climate impacts are real. That ice storm that happened, if we owned that grid, we would have lost power, y'all. Like, let's just have a real moment here, okay? That means that we need to be investing in alternative ways of functioning. And we've asked DT to be a partner in that, and they have not agreed to do that. They continue to penalize the kinds of things that we are promoting, the kinds of things that we think make sense. So we intervene. We go through the regulatory process. We challenge their assumptions. We question their experts. We bring our own experts to present alternative information. We do modeling ourselves that says, actually, we think that instead of paying someone a third of the value of that system, you should actually double the value of that system, because here's all the other benefits you are not even monetizing that those systems actually provide for the community. And so we continue to challenge and push that forward. And we work on things like a sustainable energy utility, which says, if you're not going to, then we will. We'll find a way to value that and what we really think it brings to the system. Emily, do you have another question? Did that help? I know you're not on mute. If not, please drop it in the chat for me. Other questions for our brave folks that are on, that I can see face to face?
Can I ask a question related to the solar stuff?
Yeah, of course.
With the Solarize program, are you able to participate? I guess, do you have to do full solar, or can, like, I already have solar panels. I was one of the lucky people who got in right before the 1-to-1 ended.
Yeah. Known as net metering, everyone. That's what
Yep. But I don't have a battery. So could just the battery be something I do through the Solarize program?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you totally could. You can also expand your system. So one example, not that you want to, but I'm just sharing for those who are interested. You know, let's say you were working overtime to transition to an electric and an induction cooktop, and you were thinking about a heat pump, or you weren't quite yet ready. As you add more electrical load, you can add more renewables and go through the program for sure.
Okay, great. And you also have talked a little bit about geothermal and incentives, and that's something I'd love to do. Is that something in the future, or is that something the city is doing now?
Actually, there's a few different, the way I'm going to answer this is indicative of everything that we're doing, that we're not, in all of these areas, we're not doing one thing. We're doing multiple things because we have to have redundancy and techniques and strategies, and because our timeline is so short. So for the geothermal work, council authorized the city administrator to begin negotiations on a new heating franchise. That happened last week. We have I can drop a link out for folks to a website where we're basically going to the market and we're saying, and that includes DT and others, we need to find ways of heating our homes and our businesses that's clean, affordable, safe, does not jeopardize our health, right? Like, no one should sacrifice their health to heat and cool their home. That's just not acceptable. That doesn't destroy our planet, and that is affordable and reliably priced. And one possible solution could be district geothermal, right, for the community. There's other possible options. There's capture of heat from wastewater systems. There's things I can't even think of, right, that are viable. And so we're starting to explore what might be possible in terms of like transitioning over to a more stable heating source. We also put in a grant with DT to design a geothermal system in the Bryant neighborhood that would be about repurposing gas infrastructure to be geothermal infrastructure. Right? Because geothermal uses pipes. We got pipes. We need plumbers and pipe fitters. So we want to understand, is that even possible? And we actually are going to do some, if we win, y'all, we are supposed to find out in March if we win. And that's like 2 more days. And I stalk their website. Like every 2 hours when I like get a brain fart, I just refresh to see if we won. We haven't yet. Oh, but if we win, it includes like test bores and doing the financial analysis. And then if we win that grant and we do the design, we're eligible for funding to implement the solution, right? So that would be a really big geothermal system. And in addition, so number 3, if council approves our budget, we will be releasing a request for proposals to have private entities come in and do geothermal studies of different areas of the city, so we can understand, like, what does it look like in the downtown in a more commercial corridor versus what does it look on State and Eisenhower, where we might have some major redevelopments, versus what does it look like in Burns Park or the Old West Side. So we actually want to do some test boring and designs. And I'm applying for a $50 million proposal to launch the sustainable energy utility and a geothermal district. So, you know, game on.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Good question. I am interested in solar panels and battery. How should I start? I'm going to drop, thanks for the question, Christine. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to both a website and the person. Julie Roth is the head of, I do too hope we get $50 million. Whoever just typed that. Yes, my heart is a flutter. Julie Roth is the head for our Solar Rise program. She is exceptional. She's an extraordinary human being. She is on vacation this week, but she will be back shortly. She's who you want to talk to. She'll get you in the program. All right, let me drop that. Other questions, concern, heartburn? Don't be shy. Let's see. Andre, do you want to come in?
Sorry?
Did you want to come in? I saw you pop off mute.
No.
No. All right. Okay. Looking at the questions. I don't think I'm getting this fully right with the note, but it was raised, what is Ann Arbor's kind of sustainability role in relationship with the state and federal government and the financial kind of contribution across that spectrum? So in terms of this work, we work really, really closely with peers from around the country. The state has historically not had much to invest in this space, but is growing its work, which is why we're trying to help work with our state colleagues to grow the programs and the initiatives they have. And we do work really closely with this administration. That changes, as I'm sure you could imagine. In fact, we went from what I would call a desert in terms of federal support just when A20 was adopted, right? There weren't many federal programs because everything had been gutted under the administration at the time, to today, where it's like a deluge with the bill, the IRA, and other funding opportunities, with the administration's commitment to Justice 40 and commitment to climate action. So it's been a total shift. And I think that probably is true of how this work and our relationship with the federal government kind of ebbs and flows. Also true with the state government. It's the first time we've ever had a Democratic state legislature since I've been here. So historically, I don't get to go to Lansing and not be laughed at. To go to Lansing now and actually be seen as an expert is fundamentally different than the relationship I've sort of had with our state legislature. So funding wise, this is once again the first time the state's ever really had funding for this work. So we are helping them. We are eager to help them spend that money, but we also are helping them figure out a strategy for how best to invest that money. And I've worked, just as an example, this week we worked on a letter from a bunch of municipalities to the governor with our top priorities for climate investments. You know, like they can't do everything, so here are the things where we can sort of help and support. I guess in terms of the financial contribution, I'd say historically, our sustainability work has been, outside of staff, has been funded by grants. That's still actually largely true. We actually were able to use the millage. We didn't even have it, but we were able, once it passed, to use it as match for a grant application. And I'm delighted to share with you all, we just won over $1 million in grant funding to replace every single streetlight with an LED streetlight and to install the Washington Street bike lane that's going to go out over time in the next few years. And that was only possible because the millage were able to, when it comes into effect, we're able to actually put match funding forward. So good stuff. I feel like it's so boring hearing me talk. Are you guys so bored? No? Okay. See one more question. Sorry if I missed this, but do the sustainability goals strategies include UM property? Great clarification. If not, how are you working with them to become more sustainable? So the goal does include UM because the goal is community-wide carbon neutrality, and the university is clearly an important stakeholder in the community. We also, if you were to look at A20, we modeled every action, assuming what the reduction would look like if the university participated and what it would look like if they did not participate in that individual action, so that we could understand the delta that we had to close regardless of their own decision making. So yes, it includes the university. In terms of collaboration, it's getting really exciting. It hasn't always been really great, and I think that's because of both parties. Let's see, I was on the university's carbon neutrality commission, so I was the local government representative on that. Lots of representatives from the University of Michigan participated in A20. We have an ongoing collaborators network in which many University of Michigan, including the administration, participate and give us feedback, or liaisons from the University of Michigan participate. We just released a joint, in air quote, RFP for solar installation. What I mean by that is we put it out, we use the same language, but the university put out through their template, we put out through our template, and we are going to decide independently who we pick, but we're sharing, meaning we're hoping, and we were very clear to the marketplace, we hope the same firm bids on both, because our intent is to select the same firm, but we're not giving up our own rights to follow our own processes in doing that. This is extraordinary from my experience. Like, I've never seen us work in this way, and I'm really excited about it. And then we are starting to have great conversations about things like geothermal deployment and how we might be able to collaborate, or how we activate students to be in the community when they're in the community, right? Like, when they're here, they tend to identify as University of Michigan students, but they're also Ann Arborites for the time they're here. So how do we kind of cross-pollinate across our various institutions? And I meet with my counterpart at the University of Michigan every month. We have agenda items we work on, we collaborate on. We talk about legislative policy agendas, you name it. Good question. Any other questions or heartburn? Cool, y'all.
I think you're all good, Missy. Thank you so much. And it's always a pleasure to have you. I hope they all learned a lot today, because I definitely did. And we will see everybody next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Missy.